Hello and welcome. We're on week 8 science now, and what we're going to be looking at is some of the science issues around the brain chemistry. As I mentioned before, brain chemistry is enormously complex, and in a short video like we're talking about, there's no way that we can get into that complexity. However, there are a few issues which we can mention. The first thing that I wanted to mention is the relationship between so-called stress hormones within the body, or stress chemicals within the body, and the relationship with well-being chemicals within the body. As I mentioned in the earlier video, the philosophy video, one of the most famous stress-based hormone systems is the cortisol system. Now, when we talk about cortisol, we're talking about brain chemistry here, and cortisol, of course, is actually manufactured in the adrenal glands, but nonetheless the cycle and all of the impact, or the major part of the impact of the cortisol cycle, is actually begun in the brain. So we talked about the amygdala and all of these small structures in the brain and how they actually relate to stress. In other words, there's some sort of threat coming into your system, and off it goes, the triggers begin. They're both chemical and also electronic, so nerve-based signaling, all the signaling going on in the brain. Eventually it gets to the point where the levels begin to build up within the pituitary gland, which will trigger off a precursor of cortisol. That then triggers off another chemical within the hypothalamus, which sends out signals in through the bloodstream, and next thing you know, your adrenal glands are producing cortisol at the rate of knots. So when I say that these things are very complex and interrelated, I'm not making this up. It's incredibly complex and interrelated how all of this chemistry is working. So of note is that all of these chemicals that we're referring to here are known as neurotransmitters, and what that means is that they have an impact on the way that the nerves in the brain are actually triggering. So traditionally, most of these chemicals actually work at the synapses, so this is where one neuron is joining on to another neuron, but much of the modern research is indicating that a lot of this communication that is going on isn't even synaptic, but nonetheless we think about them as being neurotransmitters. So as I say, on the one hand we've got the cortisol and stress-related chemistry, so there's a heap of them, all that chemistry out here, and then on the other hand we've got all the well-being stuff. So the most famous of the well-being chemistry is serotonin, but there's heaps of them. There's an absolute truckload of different chemicals sitting out here on this side. So we've got all the stress stuff and we've got all the well-being stuff here. And we need to have some of the stress stuff, otherwise we can't function, and we obviously need to have some of this. And if they've got way too much of this, then we're in trouble. And if you've got way too much of this, then you're in trouble. You need to be in balance. There needs to be some harmony so that you can actually have coordinated, concerted action and have a sense of well-being going forward. So as you can imagine, with all of this conflict going on within the brain, so we've got this chemical trying to do this chemical trying to do this, we've got all these impacts coming in. The brain wants to take a holiday, and so we have all these mood-enhancing chemicals, and I spoke a little bit about some of the natural opiates and that type of thing which are produced in the brain. Once again, this is an area of enormous complexity. However, for the purpose of what we're talking about is that these mood-enhancing chemicals come in as a kind of third force. So we've got stress happening here, and we've got the placation of the stress occurring here, and then in between here is a kind of a third force. We have these mood-enhancing chemicals, which are very, very important. So lastly, in terms of categories or classes of chemicals that we have within our brain, we have certain brains which are increasing the brain activity, so they're stimulants, and we've got other classes of chemicals which are dropping the level of brain activity. So both of them are very important, and certainly when we're talking about trim and its relationship to food, then we need to have a very carefully balanced brain activity so that we can be, for example, actually processing sugar in the proper way. We can be getting all the signaling going around the body around sugar metabolism, the insulin cycle and whatnot. So lastly, from the perspective of the science, what we need to consider is we've got all of this activity going on, but is it actually well directed? So that's the question that needs to be answered, and indeed it becomes a critical focus within TRIM. So what we're saying here is that, for example, a certain class of chemicals are being produced, and there are more and more of them being produced, but are the chemical receptors, in other words the ways in which these chemicals are actually being received and acted upon, are they functioning properly? And so from the perspective of communication, we have a major potential for disconnect, and indeed in the case of people who are ending up on TRIM, this is almost invariably the case, is that there's a lack of hearing going on within the brain. So one part of the brain is making all of this chemistry and escalating amounts of the chemistry, and another part of the brain just got its hands over its ears and is saying, I'd rather not hear what's going on here. So in fact we even use that kind of metaphor within the suggestion. So we talk about the idea that the information about the blood sugar levels is going to be heard and acted upon within the brain. So this is extremely critical, and I hope you get a feeling for the power and the potential for having this production and receptivity and the feeding back. Yes, we've heard the information, here you go, we've acknowledged it and we're doing our job now, so you don't need to keep making it. How important, I'm hoping that you can understand how important that it is that we get all of this meshing, and that it's actually meshing together and cooperating and collaborating in the normal way. So okay, well that's week 8 science. I promised that I would keep it short today, so we've not gone into any of the specific chemicals, and the short answer to the reason behind that is there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of chemicals that we would need to start talking about, and there's no benefit in that. The purpose of what we're looking at here is just to understand the basic principles of the science of what's going on. So thanks for watching, and look out for the next set of videos. So thanks very much. Bye.